I think the quote by Richard Rohr on the screen is a good segue from last week's conversation into this week's conversation. Only a personal experience of unconditional, unearned, and infinite love and forgiveness can move you from the normal worldview of scarcity to the divine order of infinite abundance. So, just my own little personal testimony, I've really enjoyed this season of Epiphany this year. You know, there are times when, preachers will go, oh my goodness, if I've got to think us through another Advent and come up with one more new idea, it just is no longer possible. Now, last year's Epiphany season, I think, was funkier. I don't know if you guys remember Winter Kept Us Warm. Like that was just plain clever. That was a lot of fun. I know some of you weren't here. It's okay. It doesn't matter. I won't get into it. It involved Hudson Bay coats and the cremation of Sam McGee and the hockey sweater. Loads of fun. But this season I will always remember as the season, for me anyway, of 1,000 epiphanies. And I think one of the things I most appreciated throughout the season were the personal testimonies that people shared. And I think I heard in each of those testimonies that very often when the sky breaks open or when the light breaks through, it's very often our own way that we need to get out of. Very often we may change the way we see the world, but somehow we don't quite change the way we understand ourselves because those templates that formed us are so intense. Anyway, let's talk about Paul. He had a very profound experience, and I'm not sure it matters how it happened. I think that is hardly the point of epiphanies. It's like those who have experiences of intense spiritual awakening that are likened to being born again, sometimes thinks that everyone else ought to have the same experience. I understand that because I had an experience like that, and very soon found myself in a community of people who'd had all of these profound experiences, but it wasn't long before I recognized that some of us had exchanged one set of blinders for another set of blinders. We still saw the world as them and us, that the only difference was this time we got to be in the us. So I think that there are three profound lessons that surround this story about Paul. The first is that the very community that he was on his way to imprison or murder took him in. They took him in. Somebody took him by the hand and delivered him to the home of a Christian in Damascus. Not only did they take him in, but then they launched his ministry to the communities throughout the Roman Empire. I think at some level that's the biggest miracle of all. The second is that God tagged him as the one to share the vision for an alternative way of living together. Wow. Think about that. Just in case you wonder why God tags you and wonder what good you can do to create a more inclusive, loving human community. God tagged Paul, a murderer. And third, he got over it. He got over all of his personal doubt and personal flagellation and shame and guilt and all of those hurdles that would have existed in him. He got over it and went out and spread this message of the possibility of a new way of living together. And so, is there any wonder that he could be the one who wrote 1 Corinthians 13? Love is patient. Love is kind. And what about this one? Love does not keep a record of wrongs. Boy, would he ever have understood that one. The story of Paul's epiphany and his subsequent ministry is, I think, a testimony to what is at the heart of our tradition. At its heart is love. Born of the mystery that we call God, embodied by the community, and offered not just to others, but also to ourselves. The story of Paul's epiphany affirms that God turns enemies into friends and expects us to do the same thing. And most powerful, like I said before, is the role that the community plays in modeling that vision and in nurturing Paul into his new identity. We know that did not happen overnight. We know because we each have a story of someone or a community that loved us into freedom, that loved us into experiencing and celebrating our own light. But I can't help but think that Paul had to participate in breaking his own chains in order to be free. I caught an interview the other night on As It Happens. The larger story was that Saskatchewan, my home and native province, still has the highest rate of drunk driving in the country. I think it was Carol Off was interviewing a man who 20 years earlier, at the age of 22, was speeding home. I can even see the road he was on in downtown Regina, after spending an evening at the bar, and he killed a young woman, age 22. He now works to educate the community, particularly the youth, around issues of drinking and driving. He is in a relationship with the young woman's family. They have forgiven him, which is probably why he has been able to forgive himself and serve as one who now bears light. But as I listened to that story, I thought there will be as many who are never able to forgive themselves. It is not everyone who no longer keeps a record of their own wrongs. When I look at the history of this tradition and think about how much emphasis was put on making disciples, which, by the way, we translated as making others believe what we believe, it makes me cringe. Because more often than not, we referred to the others as the heathen, not as friend, not as someone who we are invited to love and with whom we are called to break bread, but heathen. Richard Rohr reflects the Christian vision is that the world is a temple. If that is true, then our enemies are sacred too. Who else created them but the same life-giving force that created us? The ability to respect the outsider is probably the litmus test of true seeing. And it doesn't stop with human beings and enemies. It includes frogs and pansies and weeds. Everything becomes enchanting with true sight. One God, one world, one love in which we can all participate. Jesus invited his friends to love and to recognize the divine image even in our enemies. Logically, that makes no sense, but soulfully, it makes absolute sense. Because in terms of the soul, it really is all or nothing. Either we see the divine image in all created things, or we don't see it at all. So at the end of a series of major epiphanies experienced by those who shaped this tradition, I think the lesson of Paul's epiphany can serve as a foundation for all the others. Because underneath it all is an invitation to live in a circle of love, and every major epiphany we have in our life is meant to take us to that place. It is meant to free us from the chains that keep us from understanding ourselves, others, the natural world, and God as existing in one holy communion or at the same table of friends. We learned from Moses that the God of Israel is about justice, because the God of Israel is love. We learned from Samuel that the God of Israel is not invested in the old order when the old order is not invested in love. We learned from Jesus, because he had a lesson to learn as well, that the God of Israel is not interested in supporting racism, because the God of Israel is love. And we learned from Peter that the God of Israel is not interested in any religious understanding that continues to keep people from sitting at the same table, both literally and metaphorically, because the God of Israel is love. So look, someone shared with me the most wonderful story as they walked out of worship last week. As a result of these series around epiphanies, she had let go of an ancient grudge. I won't tell you how many years, because then I might give away her identity. She had heard the invitation to let go and to break free from the prison of that grudge. Sometimes the person we need to release into the circle of love is ourselves. Sometimes it is others. But this, I believe, is our deepest calling. And I would further suggest it is the invitation that the world is longing for. It is an invitation to be set free from everything that divides us from tenderness towards self and affirming the sacred humanity in everyone else. It is this invitation that will be the heart of our own healing and at the heart of the healing of the global village. I have a colleague who describes heaven like this. You are invited to an incredible banquet, and you are seated, thank you. You are seated beside your greatest enemy. And if you can sit and dine side by side your enemy, you have achieved heaven. And if you can't, you never will. During this piece of music called Welcome Table, I'm going to invite you to consider what chains still need to be broken in order for you to find yourself at that table. It is never God that keeps us out. And then, whom do you need to invite to that table so as to further widen the circle of healing and love?